Welcome everyone to ARTIVISM, the Power of Art for Social Transformation. We are now in our ninth season. Today we have with us, give me a second. Today we have with us Jaqueline Cofield. Jaqueline will explore how art can serve as a powerful tool for nurturing social imagination and addressing systemic inequities. This presentation will explore how art can serve as a powerful tool for nurturing social imagination and addressing systemic inequities. Drawing from her experiences as an educator, arts consultant, and researcher, Ms. Cofield will discuss how collaborative and interdisciplinary art practices can foster meaningful social transformation. This talk will include examples of arts integrated projects that empower marginalized communities and amplify underrepresented voices. She will also reflect on the legacy of Maxine Greene and bell hooks and the principles of reciprocity, dignity, and community in shaping a more equitable society. This presentation is being recorded for educational purposes. If you do not want your image to be on screen, you could just turn your video off. Welcome, Jaqueline.
Everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here with you all. Good afternoon, and it's an honor to be in community with ARTIVISM. I know the great work that you do. I've seen it on campus at Teachers College while I was doing my doctoral studies, so I'm delighted to be here. The title of today's presentation is Beyond Beauty, Art as a Catalyst for Social Imagination and Transformation. In my work as an educator, arts consultant, researcher, I have found that art has the power not only to reflect the world, but to reshape it. Over the next 45 minutes or so, we will explore how art, beyond its surface, beyond beauty, becomes a force for connecting, critical questioning, and collective change. In this presentation, we will move from concept to action. We'll begin with the conceptual foundation of imagination and transformation, drawing on the work of thinkers like Maxine Greene, bell hooks, and Boris Groys, and others. Then we'll explore how these theoretical ideas manifest in practice through both historical and contemporary artistic examples. And finally, we'll reflect on what these practices mean for us today, how they invite us to engage, challenge, and act in the world around us. Before we begin, I'd like to ground us in some guiding questions. How does art help us imagine new possibilities for society? What makes art more than just an object painting on a wall or a fleeting performance? What role does interdisciplinary and collaborative art play in fostering transformation? And when does artistic practice become something that challenges the status quo, redefines reality, and expands our capacity to imagine new worlds? In my dissertation, Beyond Beauty, the Epistemologies and Aesthetic Praxis of Black Women Artists, I explored the relationship between aesthetics and epistemology, questioning how artistic practice shapes ways of knowing, feeling, and being. My research contends that aesthetics is not merely about beauty, it's deeply entangled with power, perception, and the politics of knowledge. I examine how aesthetic frameworks can perpetuate hierarchies, often silencing marginalized voices. This silencing manifests as both epistemic and aesthetic violence. I argue for aesthetic learning as an embodied, relational, and context-bound process that centers learners' lived experiences. I draw upon the concept of fugitive pedagogy, a tradition of educational resistance and liberation rooted in Black educational histories, as a framework for reimagining education. At its core, my work highlights interdisciplinarity as an act of defiance against rigid academic boundaries, showing how reconnecting separated disciplines challenges oppressive paradigms. Ultimately, Beyond Beauty makes the case for arts integration as a transformative, justice-oriented practice that acknowledges and amplifies the knowledge embedded in diverse bodies, cultures, and communities. This work also inspired me to create the Beyond Beauty podcast, which centers the aesthetic praxis of diasporic Global South and Global Majority majority women artists. Across space and time, art has served as both a mirror and a challenge to societal realities. On the screen, you see Diego Rivera's recreated mural, Man, Controller of the Universe, which is emblematic of this dynamic. His work addresses labor, technology, and power, asking viewers to consider humanity's capacity to shape and control its own destiny. Rivera's murals are not passive decoration. They're provocations that reflect the tensions and possibilities of his time, much like how contemporary artists use digital activism today to address urgent issues like climate justice. In moments of political upheaval, social reckoning, and cultural shifts, artists expand our collective imagination, inviting us to witness, engage, and envision alternate futures. In this presentation, we'll explore how art functions as a catalyst for transformation, drawing on these ideas of scholars and looking at the work of artists who challenge dominant narratives, reimagine possibilities, and build pathways toward justice. At the heart of this is Beyond Beauty, the framework I developed in my dissertation, moving past aesthetic appreciation into resistance, reclamation, and renewal. We'll examine how art fosters critical consciousness, cultivates agency, and creates conditions for thriving, particularly for marginalized communities. As we begin to explore the transformative role of art, we must first consider that art is a space where power is made visible, questioned, and reimagined. On screen, you see a detail from Jose Clemente Orozco's Epic of American Civilization. In this monumental work, Orozco doesn't shy away from depicting the complexities and violence of historical power, from conquest to cultural conflict, challenging viewers to confront narratives that are often sanitized or simplified. In a similar way, Diego Rivera's murals address struggles of labor and class. His large-scale public works do more than depict historical moments. They expose inequity and call for worker solidarity. Both Orozco and Rivera use muralism as a public, accessible form of engagement, asking all who encounter their work to interrogate the forces that shape society. These murals serve as examples of how art not only reflects, but also critiques and reimagines power, setting the stage for how we understand the transformative potential of artistic practice today. On screen, you see Maxine Greene in her influential book, Releasing the Imagination. Greene's work guides much of my thinking about art education and transformation. Greene reminds us that perception is the beginning of all understanding. It is what allows us to question and move beyond the given. Artistic works, like the murals we've just seen, do exactly that. They sharpen our perception and invite us to ask what stories are being told, whose histories are being centered, and how might we imagine them differently. But Greene goes further. She challenges us to embrace imagination as the foundation of transformation, writing, "To tap into the imagination is to move beyond the given, to see beyond what is to what might be." This capacity to envision beyond what exists is what makes art so powerful. It allows both the maker and the community to reimagine what's possible. I invite you to consider how your own imagination can be nurtured, not just through art, but as part of your daily life, questioning assumptions, envisioning alternatives, and participating in the shape of more just and humane futures. On screen, you'll see a summary of Maxine Greene's call to harness imagination as a tool for social transformation. Her work provides us with a powerful framework for understanding how art pushes us beyond the limits of what we think is possible. She teaches that art allows us to break boundaries and expand perception, helping us to see beyond what we consider normal or common sense. Artistic encounters release the imagination and challenge familiar thinking, inspiring us to question and disrupt what feels fixed. Greene insists that imagination is not passive, it's emancipatory. It subverts authority and allows us to envision alternative social realities, breaking free from oppressive systems. She challenges us to practice aesthetic education, not just to appreciate art, but to engage with it deeply as both creators and participants. This engagement fosters critical thinking and encourages us to reinterpret and reimagine our lived experiences. A key part of this work is developing a decentering approach, moving beyond self-focus to genuinely connect with the diverse perspectives and lived experiences of others. And perhaps most importantly, Greene calls us to cultivate ethical imagination, using our creative capacities to address social issues and contribute to building more humane and just societies. In Greene's vision, imagination is not a luxury or a solitary act. It's a responsibility, a collective responsibility, and a pathway toward meaningful, lasting social change. Before we can fully grasp art's transformative potential, we need to understand the power of aesthetics, not simply as beauty, but as a force that shapes perception, knowledge, and social structures. Terry Eagleton reminds us that aesthetics begins with the body. It's about how the world strikes us through our senses, instincts, and most visceral experiences. Art is not distant or abstract, it's something we feel. Aesthetics, often associated with beauty and artistic form, goes beyond perception. As Eagleton writes, it is born as a discourse of the body, addressing how sensory experience resists being broken down into neat, rational units. This resistance aligns with Baumgarten's early definition of aesthetics, which centers the sensory and affective dimensions of experience that cannot be fully rationalized. Aesthetics provides us with a framework for understanding and evaluating art, shaping how we perceive and engage with creative expression. But it doesn't stop there. Aesthetic principles influence how we experience design, fashion, nature, and even the rhythm and texture of everyday life. It's through aesthetics that we interpret and respond to the world around us. As we move forward, we'll continue to see how aesthetics both structures and disrupts, guiding our perception while offering artists and curators tools to challenge established norms. Building on these ideas, Candace Chu offers another critical perspective: aesthetics as a mode of knowledge making, a way of understanding that challenges dominant frameworks of reason and invites us to imagine beyond the boundaries of traditional disciplines. In her work, Chu positions aesthetic as an alternative epistemology, a method of inquiry that expands the possibilities of interpretation and resists singular linear ways of thinking. She reminds us that aesthetics are never neutral. They are deeply implicated in histories of colonialism, race, and power, making them a vital site for reimagining knowledge production. Rather than aligning with one theoretical lineage, Chu's work is in conversation with broader aesthetic discourses, including those from Eagleton, Rancière, and Lewis, all questioning how knowledge and perception are structured, contested, and who they serve. In this way, aesthetics becomes more than just artistic concern. It becomes a tool for resisting oppressive paradigms and imagining new forms of understanding that are inclusive, dynamic, and transformative. Jacques Rancière deepens this conversation with his concept of distribution of the sensible. He describes this as the set of often invisible structures that determine what is seen, heard, and thought in a society, and just as importantly, what is rendered invisible and unheard. Rancière argues that aesthetics is inherently political because it defines the very boundaries of perception and participation. When these boundaries are set, they dictate who has a voice, who is recognized, and whose experiences are marginalized or erased. Art, then, has the power to disrupt and reconfigure this distribution. It invites new voices, brings hidden experiences into visibility, and challenges hegemonic structures that maintain exclusion. When art disrupts these distributions, it doesn't simply produce beauty, it reorders perception. It invites us to reconsider who and what we value and asks us to question why certain narratives have been prioritized over others. As we continue, we'll see how artists and curators intentionally use aesthetics as a tool for resistance, reclamation, and reimagining, shaping not only what we see, but how we understand the world around us. The conversation around aesthetics and politics is not only about the form art takes, but also about its conditions of emergence and reception. If aesthetics determines what is perceptible, then social imagination is what allows us to move beyond those limits, to see art as an intervention, provocation, and a reorientation of power structures. Boris Groys reminds us that the status of an artwork is never fixed. It depends on how and when it is framed, exhibited, and institutionalized. The act of selecting, preserving, and curating art is not neutral. It's an assertion of power. deciding which voices, styles, and histories are recognized and which remain invisible. This directly connects with the concepts of aesthetic violence and Rancière's distribution of the sensible. Together, these frameworks show us that part of the transformation that art and the curation and experience of art can offer is through new modes of selection. The power to determine what is seen, what is preserved and valued is at the heart of how art reshapes knowledge and influences societal structures. It shifts the framework of what we consider culturally and historically significant, revealing how power structures dictate access to cultural legitimacy. In this sense, art is not about what is created, it's about when, where, and why it becomes visible and transformative. In my dissertation, Beyond Beauty, I define aesthetics as a framework that structures and challenges dominant ways of perceiving and understanding the world. But aesthetics is not always liberatory. I introduced the concept of aesthetic violence to describe how aesthetic frameworks can be used to erase, distort, or marginalize certain communities, histories, and forms of expression. Jacques Rancière does not explicitly name aesthetic violence, but his concept of the distribution of the sensible helps us to understand how certain voices and expressions are systematically included or excluded within artistic and political spaces. These implicit structures determine what is visible, audible, and thinkable in a society, and by extension, who gets to be seen and heard. Aesthetic violence, then, is not just about omission, it's about the systematic invalidation or appropriation of certain forms of expression, while others are upheld as superior. It actively shapes who is allowed to be culturally recognized and who remains silenced or distorted in both artistic and intellectual spaces. Understanding this dynamic pushes us to ask, who is granted aesthetic legitimacy? Whose beauty, stories, and knowledge are made visible? And whose are obscured? As we continue, we'll see how artists use their work to confront this violence and reimagine new possibilities for reinterpretation and recognition. Now that we've explored how aesthetics shapes what we see and value, let's turn to three key questions. When, where, and why does art happen? Nelson Goodman, as cited by Eileen Winner, invites us to shift from asking what is art to when is art. This shift encourages us to recognize that the same object can function as art or not, depending entirely on its context and framing. An everyday object can become art when placed in a museum or through curatorial intervention. And when something functions as art, it displays certain aesthetic symptoms that invite interpretation and emotional engagement. Boris Groys extends this conversation by reminding us that art is never free from institutional power. The acts of selecting, displaying, and preserving are exercises of authority. Groys emphasizes that these decisions shape which voices, histories, and narratives are elevated and which remain excluded. Let's ground these ideas in some concrete examples so we can see how artists and curators play with these questions of when, where, and why art occurs, and how those decisions can challenge or reinforce cultural power. When we ask when is art, we move beyond the object or performance itself. Art happens in its exhibiting, its sharing, and its externalizing in the moment when it enters public life and engages collective meaning-making. Boris Groys emphasizes that art is not only in its creation, but in its mediation and institutional framing. The context in which art is presented, whether through curation, public intervention, or community engagement, shifts its meaning and power. We see these ideas embodied in the work of the following artists. Each of these works answers the question, when is art, by demonstrating that art happens when it enters public space, provokes dialogue, and reorients power. Starting with the short video of Susan Lacey's The Crystal Quilt, a large-scale public performance engaging 430 women in storytelling, making art visible through collective dialogue. Suzanne Lacey's The Crystal Quilt is part of her ongoing exploration of aging and how older women are represented in public life and media. Developed over 2 years, the project included lectures, film screenings, and a leadership series for women over 60. It culminated in a large-scale Mother's Day performance in a shopping complex where 430 women sat at quilt pattern tables. Their synchronized hand movements transformed the design throughout the performance, while a soundscape of personal stories and social analysis filled the space. At the end, an audience of nearly 3,000 people joined the performers, turning the ordinary quilt into a colorful, dynamic celebration of visibility and collective power. I'll play a short portion. Oh, wait. Is it playing? Hold on.
Idag Jesus fött, han lyste stjärnan som en sol och änglasång så sött. Inunion Esteri Hilma Kanerva Alexen Gemino Satan and Ducks Water from my name is Ellen Sundstrom. I'll be 70 years old come July 9th. Newspapers 76 years. Edna B. Olson, age 74. Well, my name is Elva Trudell. I'm going to be 90 years old. Seal Hagenbrock. Oh, I'm 65. My name is Hazel Cherney, and I'm 75 years young. My name is Elsie Gobranson, and I live in Proctor, Barb Nancy.
Okay. I invite you to find this online and to continue to see it. Okay, let me go to the next. Marcel Duchamp's ready-mades push us to ask, when does an object become art? By placing everyday objects like a urinal in a gallery, Duchamp challenges us to reconsider authorship, context, and institutional validation. His ready-mades remind us that art is not only created in the studio, it's created in the act of selection and framing. This directly relates to Boris Groy's argument that the power of art lies not just in making, but in choosing, in determining what is shown, when and where, and thereby transforming how it is perceived. Duchamp's work continues to influence how we think about curatorial power and challenges us to question the boundaries of artistic legitimacy and authority. The Esther Gates Dorchester project shows us where art can happen. On Chicago's South Side, Gates transforms abandoned buildings into vibrant cultural centers, spaces that house archives, libraries, and performance areas, and gathering spaces for Black cultural production. This work emphasizes that art is not just about creating objects, it's about transforming spaces and relationships. It's an evolving communal process that reclaims neglected places and repurposes them as hubs of creativity, history, and dialogue. Gates' work powerfully illustrates that curation, restoration, and community building are themselves forms of artistic practice, aligning with Boris Groy's assertion that selection, framing, and context shape meaning and value. Having seen how Esther Gates transforms neglected spaces into centers of cultural life, we are reminded that where art happens is not fixed. Art emerges in spaces that are reclaimed, repurposed, and charged with new meaning. But art is not just about physical place, it's situational, contextual, and relational. It responds to power structures and questions accessibility. Bell Hooks reminds us that Black folks from slavery on shared with one another special knowledge of whiteness gleaned from close scrutiny of white people, a survival strategy in a white supremacist society. This act of observation and strategic interpretation also appears in how artists place their work to disrupt dominant narratives. If where art happens is situational and shaped by power, then why art happens is just as urgent a question. Art is not only a product of human creativity. It is a fundamental way of knowing, questioning, and imagining beyond present realities. It serves as a bridge between what is and what could be, shaping how societies process history, identity, and power structures. Art does not merely represent reality, it creates new forms of existence, visibility, and agency, expanding the boundaries of what can be imagined and enacted. Theory is a framework for interpreting the world and imagining new possibilities. Artistic practice, then, is a form of theorizing and questioning, experimenting, and making meaning through creative expression. Just as theory helps us conceptualize knowledge, artistic practice materializes and enacts theory in a sensory realm, offering new ways of knowing and understanding the world. Maxine Greene contends that through art, individuals and communities cultivate social imagination, the ability to perceive possibilities beyond current conditions and foster transformation on both personal and collective levels. We see these ideas embodied in the following works. Starting with Tanya Bruguera's Tatelin Whisperer #6, is a work that powerfully illustrates where and why art matters as both a political and social intervention. In this participatory performance, Cuban citizens were invited to speak freely for 1 minute on a public stage, an act prohibited under Cuba's authoritarian regime. Bruguera's work didn't just symbolize free speech, it created a temporary space where it was enacted, exposing the fragility of that freedom and the risks of speaking truth to power. This piece blurs the boundaries between art and activism, demonstrating that art can be more than representation, it can be a direct political act. Bruguera's work challenges us to consider how art can open spaces for expression where none exists, confronting oppression and making both visible the desire and danger of liberation. It reminds us that art is not only for reflection, but for provocation, dialogue, and action. And in Answering Why Art, we turn to Faith Ringgold's Who's Afraid of Aunt Jemima, a powerful example of art as narrative reclamation. This story quilt weaves together text, image, and textile art to challenge longstanding racial and gender stereotypes. The figure of Aunt Jemima, historically used as a caricature of Black women, is here reimagined as a successful businesswoman and beloved matriarch. Ringgold's work demonstrates how art moves beyond traditional gallery spaces into homes, cultural memory, and collective storytelling to challenge dominant narratives. By reclaiming this figure through fabric and story, Ringgold disrupts imposed identities and asserts self-definition. This piece embodies why art matters. It's a vehicle for rewriting histories, restoring dignity, and creating new cultural legacies. Through materials traditionally dismissed as craft, Ringgold's work challenges the boundaries of artistic legitimacy, showing that resistance and reclamation can be stitched together, quite literally, into forms that carry both beauty and defiance. Continuing with where is art and why art matters, we turn to Kara Walker's monumental installation, A Subtlety. This towering sugar-coated sphinx was installed in Brooklyn's Domino Sugar Factory, a space heavy with historical memory. The sculpture confronts the legacy of the sugar industry, slavery, and the exploitation of Black bodies for profit. Walker uses place, scale, and materiality to force an embodied confrontation with racial capitalism. The work's immense presence and sweetness of material contrast with its brutal historical subject matter, making viewers physically navigate histories often ignored or sanitized. In doing so, Walker challenges us to ask, who decides what art is, where it is seen, and how it shapes collective memory? Her work exemplifies how art can intervene in the public space, confront uncomfortable histories, and expand social imagination. Art, in this case, does not just illustrate history, it forces us to feel its weight, its injustice, and the urgency of reckoning. Another powerful example of where and why art matters is found in the work of Emory Douglas, who served as the Minister of Culture for the Black Panther Party. Douglas's graphic designs and illustrations for the Black Panther newspaper were not art for art's sake, they were tools of political mobilization. His imagery visualized radical calls for liberation, community defense, and self-determination, reaching everyday people in clear, immediate ways. This is art as activism, as education, and as social theorizing. It functioned not only in galleries, but in the hands of community members, in homes, on street corners, and at protests. His work shows how art can become part of the fabric of daily life, offering critique, inspiration, and mobilization. All of these works, from Ringgold and Walker to Douglas, connect back to social imagination. They show that art is not static, it is dynamic, relational, and intentional. Art arises from decisions about context, power, and purpose. And through that, it invites us to imagine new realities, question the status quo, and consider what might be possible beyond the world we're given. Having explored how artists like Walker and Douglas use visual language to confront power and shape collective imagination, we now turn to the work of Bell Hooks, whose thinking helps us understand why looking itself can be a radical act. Bell Hooks introduces the concept of oppositional gaze as a powerful form of resistance. For marginalized community, and particularly Black women, to look, to critically observe, to question, and refuse passive consumption is to reclaim agency in a world that often renders them invisible. Bell Hooks captures this defiance in Black looks, race, and representation. In writing, by courageously looking, we defiantly declared, not only will I stare, I want my look to change reality. That stare, that act of witnessing, is part of what transforms art from object to intervention. We see this gaze come alive in the work of Renee Cox, whose Yo Mama series places her own body at the center in powerful, unapologetic poses. Cox challenges viewers to confront stereotypes and engage with her on her own terms, reclaiming both image and narrative. Even Emory Douglas's graphic work for the Black Panther Party can be seen through this lens. His illustrations offered counter-narratives to mainstream portrayals of Black life, creating images of pride, strength, and defiance. The oppositional gaze, then, is not only about seeing differently, it is about insisting that others do so as well. It challenges dominant ways of looking and invites us to imagine new ways of being seen and understood. Bell Hooks teaches us that theory can be a location for liberation and healing. She remarked that, I came to theory because I was hurting. I saw in theory a location for healing. Artistic practice, like theory, can provide us space to confront pain, cultivate joy, and build community. After discussing Bell Hooks' emphasis on healing and theory as a liberatory practice, I want to share a powerful example of contemporary work that resonates deeply with these ideas. Just days before this presentation on March 21st, so last Friday, the Ancestral Avant-Garde Conference took place at Manchester School of Art, led by Claire Bishop. This gathering focused on the resurgence of ancestralism in contemporary art, how artists are engaging with ritual, lineage, and collective knowledge as responses to global crises, from climate change to systemic oppression. Artists and scholars like Yinka A.C. Graves, Grace Indiritu, Claire Tacons, and Lucy Wright presented their work that asked challenging questions. Whose ancestors are being invoked, and for what purpose? How do these practices connect across different histories and geographies? And how can we approach spiritual and participatory art with both openness and critical reflection? This work aligns beautifully with the themes of Beyond Beauty. It reminds us that transformation is not only forward-looking, it also draws deeply from the wisdom of those who came before us. These practices bridge the personal, the cultural, and the political, inviting us to reimagine how we gather, how we heal, and create in community. What I find most powerful about this movement is how it challenges Western rationalism by returning to ritual, spirituality, and collective storytelling as valid, necessary, and transformative forms of knowledge-making and world-building. As we reflect on why art matters, these practices show us that art is not simply a commentary on the world. It is a living, breathing force for healing, connection, and collective renewal. As we've seen, art is deeply intertwined with questioning, healing, and reimagining, but it's also closely connected to education. Claire Bishop discusses how many contemporary artists use educational forms, lectures, workshops, collaborative learning spaces as part of their artistic practice. These projects do more than deliver information. They create spaces for critical reflection, dialogue, and shared inquiry. One of the most iconic examples is Joseph Beuys, who famously said, "Teaching is my greatest work of art." He founded the Free International University for Creativity and Interdisciplinary Research, where he viewed education as not as hierarchical instruction, but as democratic creative act. His work reminds us that learning itself can be an artistic medium, a form of collective world building. In my own curatorial practice, I hold this philosophy close. Every exhibition, every public program is an opportunity for pedagogical engagement. I don't see exhibitions as static displays, but as living curricula, spaces where audiences are invited to question, reflect, and learn. I seek to design experiences that foster dialogue, build community, and encourage new ways of seeing. In this way, curating becomes teaching, and teaching becomes an artistic, collaborative act of imagining and shaping new possibilities. We've explored how pedagogy can be an artistic practice, a space of collective questioning and reimagining, but not all interventions happen in formal spaces or structured settings. Some of the most powerful artistic interventions take place in everyday moments, confronting bias and power dynamics directly, person to person. Adrian Piper's calling cards are a compelling example of conceptual art functioning as everyday intervention in social theorizing. Piper carried small printed cards that she would hand out in public spaces when confronted with racist or gendered assumptions. These cards directly addressed the comments or actions of strangers, calling attention to the assumptions they made based on her appearance. This work reminds us that art can be direct, personal, and confrontational. It doesn't need a museum wall or formal recognition to disrupt and provoke reflection. Piper's calling cards show us that art can exist in the moment as a tool for dialogue, resistance, and social consciousness. In this way, Piper expands the definition of art beyond object of performance, transforming it into an ongoing lived practice of challenging systemic bias and making the invisible visible. Adrian Piper's calling cards remind us that art is not just something we look at, it's something we can challenge, shape, disrupt, and reshape our everyday interactions. Building on this idea of art as intervention, I'd like to introduce the concept of transformative activist stance, as described by Anna Stasenko. Dr. Stasenko challenges the idea that human development is about adapting to the world. Instead, she argues that we are not just shaped by our environments, we actively participate in reshaping them. In this sense, art is not passive or reactive, it's a form of world building. Artists are not simply observers, they are creators who imagine new possibilities and bring them into being through their work. Whether through sculpture, performance, or community engagement, artists transform the world and in the process transform themselves. We see this clearly in the work of Theaster Gates, who revitalizes abandoned spaces and turns them into cultural hubs, and Thomas Hirshhorn, whose community-driven monuments bring people together in sustained dialogue. As Sisenko writes, becoming is about transforming the world while transforming oneself in and through this very process. Art then is not just reflective, it's transformative. It makes space for change both within us and around us, reminding us that imagination and action are inseparable. In discussions of aesthetics and curation, what is present is only part of the story. Sarah Lewis introduces the concept of negative assembly, the recognition that absence, omission, and what is left unsaid or unseen play an active role in shaping meaning. In art and curation, absence is not emptiness. It's a deliberate act that frames perception, guiding how narratives are constructed and how histories are remembered. Every act of selection and omission is a form of power. These choices shape collective memory and influence which voices, experiences, and histories are elevated or ignored. Negative assembly invites us to interrogate what is missing and to ask why. It reveals how absence can illuminate the structures of exclusion and the silences within cultural and aesthetic production. In this way, curation and artistic presentation are not simply about showcasing content, they are ethical and political processes that shape what is understood as valuable and visible. Absences prompt critical reflection and open space for reimagining what stories deserve to be told and what voices need to be heard. The deliberate deletion and marginalization of Black figures in Western art history is a long-standing issue, one that contemporary artists like Amy Sherald confront directly. An example of this historical erasure is seen in Belézard and the Frey Children, which appears on the screen. For years, this portrait depicted only the three white Frey children. The figure of Belézard, a young Black boy, was deliberately painted over, his presence removed from the visual record, likely around the early 20th century. This act of erasure aligns with what Sarah Lewis calls negative assembly, the strategic omission of certain bodies and narratives from visual culture, shaping public perception and reinforcing racial hierarchy. Photographer Dawood Bey describes Belézard's figure as lifted, elevated, noting that his placement in the composition signals significance. His relaxed yet self-assured stance resists the logic of subjugation. Yet his erasure speaks volumes. It reveals the broader historical practice of exclusion, where Black presence in portraiture was either removed, minimized, or relegated to the background in service of white subjects. The reappearance of Belisar through restoration and re-examination asks viewers to confront these absences and to reconsider whose stories have been made visible, whose have been silenced, and how art can reclaim and restore historical memory. Having explored the historical frameworks of exclusion, power, and aesthetic decision-making, we now turn to contemporary artists whose work embodies social imagination and transformation. These next artists confront difficult realities, challenge dominant narratives, and offer new possibilities for how we understand ourselves and each other. Together, these works remind us that art is dynamic and relational. It's not simply about representation. It is about provocation, participation, and the imagining of alternative futures. First, Amy Sherald's portrait of Breonna Taylor stands out as a powerful example of how art can reclaim representation and transform collective mourning into dignity and remembrance. Ellen Winner introduces the concept of aesthetic distance with the idea that art allows us to engage with painful content while also creating space for reflection and meaning-making. Sherald's portrait does exactly that. Through her signature use of vibrant color, calm composure, and monumental stillness, she shifts Breonna Taylor from a media-saturated victim narrative to a presence of grace, humanity, and strength. This is not simply memorialization. It is an act of narrative reclamation, a refusal to let Breonna Taylor be defined solely by the violence done to her. Sherald's work also embodies Bell Hook's concept of the oppositional gaze. Taylor's steady gaze meets the viewers directly, asserting her presence and demanding recognition. It invites us to sit with discomfort, to reflect, and to honor the life that was lost while imagining a world where such losses no longer occur. This portrait becomes both a site of beauty and a call to justice. An example of art can shift public consciousness and help communities hold space for grief, resilience, and possibility. Next, Nick Cave's sound suits offer both protection and transformation, embodying the possibilities of social imagination. These vibrant, wearable sculptures obscure identity, allowing the wearer to move freely, untethered from race, gender, or other imposed social categories. Cave began making sound suits in a response to violence against Black bodies, particularly the brutal beating of Rodney King in 1991. The sound suits create a space where the body is both shielded and celebrated, offering protection from racial profiling while transforming the wearer into something otherworldly and powerful. These works invite movement and spectacle, drawing from performance, dance, and ritual. They reimagine a world where identity is fluid and protected, where marginalized bodies can reclaim space and agency. Cave's sound suits challenge traditional representations of Blackness and bodily visibility in public space, turning concealment into empowerment and escape into resistance. By merging sculpture, performance, and fashion, his work becomes an act of defiance against surveillance and erasure, demonstrating how art can both be a refuge and a tool for transformation. Continuing with the theme of transformation and social imagination, Simone Leigh's Brick House stands as a monumental assertion of Black female presence in public space. This 16-foot-tall bronze sculpture installed on New York City's High Line depicts the head and torso of a Black woman whose form merges with architectural references drawn from African vernacular structures, including domed huts and clay dwellings. Brick House is both solid and graceful, monumental and intimate. It challenges historical erasure by placing Black womanhood at the center of public space, a place where it has too often been invisible or misrepresented. Leigh's work draws on Black feminist aesthetics, celebrating resilience, beauty, and power. The sculpture's scale forces viewers to look up, both physically and metaphorically, confronting societal hierarchies and reclaiming space in the urban landscape. This work exemplifies how public art can function as a form of social imagination, reshaping who is seen, whose histories are honored, and what kinds of bodies are monumentalized in the collective memory of a city. Ellen Winner emphasized that artworks create imaginative experiences for both the maker and the perceiver. Art invites us into a pretend world, but one that allows us to reflect deeply on real-world complexities. This understanding enriches our discussion of how art functions as a space for social imagination. Winner also reminds us that artworks don't exist in isolation. They emerge from historical traditions and lineages of expression and resistance. This lineage is evident in contemporary works like Amy Sherrill's Portrait of Breonna Taylor, which allows us to process collective grief through aesthetic distance. Winner explains that when we experience art with painful content, we feel both negative and positive emotions because we understand these feelings are mediated by art, not by immediate reality. This meaning-making process is one of art's most important functions. She also builds on Nelson Goodman's argument that we should ask not only what is art, but when is art, a perspective that connects directly to curation and context. When an object functions as art, it exhibits certain aesthetic qualities that invite interpretation, dialogue, and emotional engagement. This is what artists like Kara Walker and Theaster Gates leverage, placing their work in specific contexts that provoke reflection on history, race, and community. Finally, Winner insists that art making is itself a way of understanding the world, not something decorative or secondary, but fundamental to survival. This reinforces the core argument of this lecture that art is both a catalyst and a container for social imagination and transformation. Drawing on Claire Bishop's discussion of pedagogic art, it becomes clear that transformative artistic practices operate with what Felix Guattari describes as a double finality. There are both interventions in the social field and reflective acts that question and celebrate the institution of art itself. Projects such as Tania Bergueda's Arte de Conducta and Thomas Hirschhorn's project that we saw exemplify this approach. These works balance authority and freedom, echoing Paulo Freire's vision of dialogue, education, and Jacques Rancier's insistence on the presupposition of equality of intelligence. Such practices foreground transversality, a creative, undisciplined crossing of boundaries that disrupts rigid institutional structures and rehumanizes both artistic and educational spaces. The classroom, the museum, the exhibition space become dynamic, relational, and continuously evolving sites of inquiry, spaces where participation is not just allowed, but necessary for meaning making. These projects challenge us to move beyond passive spectatorship into collective imagining and action. Claire Bishop reminds us that artistic interventions are not just static objects, but dynamic public gestures that use timing, space, and visual codes to provoke conversation and challenge systems of power. Those interventions often happen without official permission, relying on everyday visual language rather than traditional references to art history. They mobilize media attention and focus on striking at the right moment, what Gramsci and Stuart Hall describe as kairos, the opportune moment for action. An example of this is in Sacramento in Brazil, where activists place bags over the heads of public statues. This simple yet powerful gesture calls attention to enduring symbols of dictatorship, sparking debate and social reflection. Such actions are re-semiotized, reinterpreted in contemporary political terms, and demonstrate how art can intervene directly in public discourse. Bishop emphasizes that time can be as important as space in interventionist work. Interventions rely on disruption in multiple forms, and she talks about aesthetic disruption, semiotic disruption, and social disruption. These interventions operate through gesture, using visual vocabulary to provoke thought, discomfort, and response. Some of these actions are part of the broader movements of ARTIVISM, where art intersects with activism. But importantly, they are not always explicitly cause-driven. Rather, they open moments of questioning and reinterpretation, activating the social imagination and inviting collective reflection. As we conclude, I return to these questions to you. What realities can we co-create through imagination? How can artistic practice be a form of theorizing and intervention? And how will you carry these questions into your own work and communities? Art asks us not only to imagine, but also to act. I hope today's conversations inspire both. Beyond beauty is not just an artistic concept, it's an invitation to see art as a catalyst for social imagination and transformation. Maxine Greene teaches us that imagination allows us to break with the given and envision what might be. Bell Hooks reminds us that theory and artistic practice can be a location for healing, for liberation, and for reclaiming narratives that have been silenced. Art, excuse me, okay, so yes, that's it. Thank you for being part of this conversation. These are my works cited, and this is how we may stay in contact. Thank you very much.
Carolina, you're on mute.
Thank you, Professor RG, for that. Thank you, Dr. Cofield, for being here and for sharing all this marvelous work in regards to the importance of art and how it forms and shapes society. Because sometimes, unfortunately, the arts are seen as the last subject to be taught, right? They're the first to be cut when funding is a little short or not available. But before we open up the floor for conversation, I would like to mention that this coming Monday, March 31st, Michelle Anglisano and Kristen McDermott will present Believe Positivity Changes Lives, a meditation workshop based on the TV show Ted Lasso. For more information on this and all the series past and upcoming events, please visit the website at www.adelphi.edu/artivism. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram at ARTIVISM, the cipher for a shared humanity, or simply you can Google ARTIVISM Initiative. On our YouTube channel, you can check it out by putting also for shared humanity. Also, if you'd like to get involved, present, be a volunteer, be part of the exhibitions that are coming up, or any other way that you can think of, please just reach out to us and be part of this ongoing initiative. And now the floor is open. Please unmute yourself, put the question in the chat, however you feel most comfortable to participate in this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cofield. This was so rich in information and the actual works to refer to. This is a really good source for references. You touched upon everything and put it all together in a nice little package. Thank you. Yes, Nicole?
This was fascinating. I am absolutely riveted by your work, Dr. Cofield, and thank you for sharing. I wish we had more time together. I'm really curious what brought you to this work.
That's a great question, and I write about it in my dissertation, actually. I grew up in upstate New York. I'm Black, and I grew up in a very white space, often being the only person of color in my classes growing up, a suburb of Rochester, New York. And I began to feel really alienated in my class. I was always a stellar student, but I started feeling alienated because of the centeredness of Eurocentrism and curricula and schooling scenarios. And my family, my father from Louisiana, mother from Watts, California / Virginia, I really had my education outside, so much of my education outside of school. And my parents, because my dad was a professor, he signed me up to study abroad in Cuernavaca, Mexico, when I was in middle school. This was a way to sort of re-excite me about the learning environment. And it was there that I saw Diego Rivera's murals for the first time. And that changed everything for me because as I showed in the early slide, Diego Rivera murals, told the good, the bad, and the ugly. It was telling a histories that I wasn't getting in school. I always wondered why I was not learning about people I would like Emmett Till. Why was I not learning that in school, etc. I found art to be the place where I could learn, where I found art and artists to be a better teacher for me, a more holistic teacher, a more truthful teacher. And so this has been sort of a lifelong engagement where I seek out art, I seek out artists, engaging with artists and engaging with the works that they make to learn. And now as an educator myself, to teach.
Dr. Lake says in the chat, as a criminologist, I was feverishly jotting down notes and examples for classes. Same here. Same here. Yeah, jotting down notes for classes and potential art projects, right? I mean, how could you turn something that you talked about here today into a project for students to learn more.
Well, that's a great honor and compliment, and I really appreciate that. Um, I have found my interdisciplinarity to be my secret power.
Mhm.
I'm at the intersection of education and curriculum and pedagogy. I'm also in very much deeply embedded in art history, art and studio practice, artistic practice. And with my podcast and my research, I am directly working with artists, learning from them themselves, which I've been told by a mentor who is a professor in an art history department. She told me that when she was going to school and doing her PhD in art history, she was told, don't talk to the artists.
Mhm.
So I have learned and realized that my approach is different in part because it's interdisciplinary. And also because I do center the perspectives and the practices of artists. And so even in my dissertation, my main question, I was really curious, what could, you know, teachers in traditional and maybe non-traditional learning spaces, what could they learn from the artistic praxis of these artists that I was working with? What if we studied a studio practice? How could that inform how we approach the classroom in a traditional classroom? How could we make it more engaging? What are they doing in these spaces where they're being so creative? Why are we not doing some of that in the classrooms? And how can we do some of these things? So I really do value artistic practice, as an intervention and as an important site for study as well.
And
So yeah.
what is art? What's not art, right? Why are crafts not art? What is the sociology of art versus art for art's sake and all that? I did want to also point out Titus Kafar. I'm not too sure I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, who whitewashes certain images on historical paintings to shift the narrative. Um, that's a good project as well for students.
That's
Find
great.
a work, change the narrative by kind of, erasing some to shift the focus elsewhere.
Yeah. Uh, Titus Kafar has a really amazing TED Talk that I
Yes.
encourage would be a good starting point for engaging students in his practice. There's a couple of artists who have done TED Talks, which I use those in my teaching. Wengechi Mutu as well. Various artists that do TED Talks, and that's an opportunity to hear the artists, speaking themselves about their practice.
In the chat, Vicky says putting art in the classroom breaks down the patriarchy-driven focus on studies in studies. Yes.
Oh yeah, I mean that's a whole nother, we could spend a whole hour just talking about that. Because
And
I am a big arts integration advocate. In other words, I don't believe that art only belongs in an art classroom. Uh,
no. and
the
and,
art,
and when you're teaching, I mean, when I'm teaching, it's one thing to lecture or talk about art and the power of art and its transformative and healing powers, but you have to bring art making into it as well, because to really, really believe in it, you have to experience it.
yeah, absolutely.
Just to bring to conversation also the marvelous part where you say about the omission. It's not so much what is there as much as also what is omitted. And with that, I would like to, hear your thoughts in regards to, say, for example, the next chapters in our history, right? If we go down the line 400 years from now or so, who will be the great masters, and how in your curatorial scope are you considering we can change that dichotomy that has been going on from the Western male European perspective, of course, right? And apart from putting more diversity in those seats, right, that are by curators, what else can be done to have those voices present 400 years from now?
Wait, am I? Oh, okay. I'm not. I thought I had muted myself while I was listening. Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite things to do when I take people on tours looking at art is I like to talk about what we don't see. In if it's a piece of visual art, like what are we not seeing? Because it just sort of allows us to appreciate the choices that have been made. And um, I included the conference that just happened in Manchester on ancestral knowledge. I included that because I'm really fascinated with Claire Bishop's, who was one of my professors of art history when I took courses through the consortium at the Graduate Center. I'm really fascinated with her. She is someone who really does make space for these different approaches, these different forms of knowledge, these different, and when I say different, they're just departures from our norm, our patriarchal Eurocentric norm. And so I think that if we're thinking about like future, supporting future artists, we definitely have to be thinking outside of what is what we consider traditional. We have to allow them space and encourage them to value their own lived experiences, their own ancestries, etc. Because they're going to be in that case they would bring so much that we couldn't even anticipate. We can't really have, there's so much boundaries around things in all the disciplines and also in the arts. And so if we can have opportunities to release those boundaries, then that will invite more participation, more divergent voices in creativity.
And also apropos to this portion of the conversation that we're having, the matter that comes to hand is funding, right? And how we have to sometimes struggle with funding certain projects that go against the status quo. Any words on that?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And I encourage, like when I teach pre-service teachers, and I encourage them to think intrapreneurially, when they're in their school, because the community, in my opinion, the community has a social responsibility to contribute. All the businesses around the school, all the institutions, all the people around the school have a social responsibility. And so this idea of social responsibility is something that we need to impart more. And then that would open up the door for people feeling that they can go approach. And I say this because at one point when I was working on my book on arts integration, I was working in Pittsburgh as a substitute teacher on the days I wasn't writing. And one of my favorite schools to go to was called Dilworth Academy in Pittsburgh. And every morning they start with an assembly where they invited musicians from the community on the stage. All the kids come into school, they go into the auditorium, they sit for the assembly, and they hear this amazing, like multifold, drum setters, which also included students who were studying music. And so the students are on the stage with the musicians from the community. And it just was so invigorating. And that was how they start every single day. And they invited people from the community to come in. And I think that we need to see more of that, more of, going out to corporations and asking them to support the school, letting people know in the community how they can support the school, how they can support the arts in the school, etc. So that entrepreneurial spirit is going to be essential for moving forward.
There are some comments in the chat you may want to look at. Any other questions or comments?
Yes, I agree with you, Stephanie. The separations of the disciplines is epistemological violence,
Mhm.
and it's not it's not really grounded in anything true or real. It's unnatural, in my opinion, and it it it's not, it doesn't help to engage the students. Everything's, it's like a body. The body's all connected. You can't like, try to sell that they're separate, and so it's the same with the disciplines. They're connected. But at some point there was you know, uh, somebody decide that they want to have all these disciplines be very siloed, very competitive to each other, and create hierarchies. And, there's dubious, pernicious, mm, ideas around behind those
Yep.
choices.
A lot of people who think they know better
Mhm.
and
So
are
I
willing
really,
to harm students if it means defending their territory, their turf.
yeah. And one of the things I do encourage teachers to do is to collaborate, not only with outside of the school, entrepreneurially with the community, but to collaborate inside of the school with other departments. And that's something I advocate in my book on arts integration, which you can find on Amazon. And I model that for educators, and I tell teachers, you want to integrate art in your math classroom, you feel like you don't know about the arts, you don't have to be the one to know about the arts. You can collaborate with artists. That them, you don't have to be the expert on everything. If you want to incorporate dance into your classroom, you can go and seek out dancer who have that expertise. You don't not do it because you don't have that skill. You can collaborate, and that will offer, give a greater offering to your students. And so this individual, which is really grounded in white supremacist ideologies, this individualistic approach to really everything has to be dismantled as well.
Mhm.
Well, this was lovely. Thank you all so much. I appreciate your being here, and I hope to stay in dialogue with you.
Definitely. And before we close, thank you, Dr. Cofield, for your generosity in sharing with us your time and your knowledge and your research. And we have a tradition here in ARTIVISM that before we close, we ask our presenter, today is your turn, to just leave us with a key takeaway for action.
Yeah, I guess the key takeaway for action, based on the conversation that we had after the presentation, would be really to encourage educators to think entrepreneurially about how they can bring arts into the school. To be maybe someone who helps them make those connections and relationships with people in institutions in the community, with artists in the community. Maybe they don't know how to engage.
Thank you, Dr. Cofield. Thank you to our sponsors, Adelphi University, Sync for Hope, Gottesman Libraries of Teachers College, Columbia University, to Dr. Stephanie Lake, to Carolina, to everyone here today. We hope to see you again next week. We have a full schedule for the month of April and going then into May for the finale for season 9. Thank you, everyone. Be well.